So here it is, our biochemistry or our chemical foundation of biochemistry. Um, so we're looking at living organisms and we're looking at biological processes through the lens of chemistry. That's basically what this class is and what this field is. Um, so the basis of all life is chemical reactions that take place within a cell. That's what we're focusing on, within the confines of that cell. Chemistry allows for a high degree of complexity and organization, the extraction, transformation, and systematic use of energy to create and maintain structures and to do work, the interactions of individual components to be dynamic and coordinated, the ability to sense and respond to changes in the surroundings, a capacity for fairly precise self-replication while allowing enough change for evolution. Okay, so that's what chemistry affords us. And living systems take advantage of all of those different things. Sorry about that. So organisms can be classified, just as we've already talked about, they can be classified based on their RNA sequence, or ribosomal RNA sequence. They can be classified by their cellular makeup. Heck, you could classify, does it have a cell wall or not a cell wall? So there are many different classifications, but obviously some emerge as more valuable than others over time. One way that you can classify organisms an additional way that you classify organisms is what is their energy source. So you can classify them as being chemotrophs or phototrophs. So if they are a chemotroph, they're going to utilize chemicals to extract energy. If they are phototrophs, they are going to extract energy from sunlight. Then when you go further from that, you can break these things down a lot further, or you can break these things down and divide them up a lot further and get to individual individual organisms. Then you can just process it and triage that information more and more and more. So you can break things down a lot based on these two general classifications. Living systems that extract energy from the sun are plants, green bacteria, cyanobacteria. Living systems that extract energy from fuels would be something like animals and most bacteria. Now, the way that a phototroph is going to work is it's going to bring in sunlight, photons of sunlight, and it's going to have photosynthetic cells that are going to produce carbohydrates and oxygen. And then heterotrophic cells are going to take that oxygen and those carbohydrates and break them down into CO2 and H2O. So your phototrophs and your chemotrophs work in concert with one another. The molecular logic of life, we look at the chemistry that is behind the initiation and acceleration of reactions. So think about this in terms of enzymes. The organization and specificity of metabolism and signaling. Well, again, you could kind of look at this as enzymes. The storage and transfer of information and energy as well. Now, our molecular hierarchy of structures, well, let's start over here at our monomeric units. We have three major monomeric units. We have nucleotides, amino acids, and sugars. Now, your nucleotides are going to feed in the production of DNA, which DNA is then going to feed into the production of chromatin. And that chromatin is going to be stored within the nucleus. Now, amino acids those are the monomeric subunit that make up proteins. Those proteins are going to be found within the plasma membrane, but also proteins are a key part of chromatin structure. Sugars, our last monomeric unit, are going to assemble to make a large polymer like cellulose. That cellulose is going to kind of thread itself into other cellulose molecules to make the cell wall. And that cell wall is going to separate one cell from another cell. So one thing that if you think about and if you've taken any sort of biology class, you've probably talked about major macromolecules. You've probably talked about fats, you've sugars, and proteins, and probably nucleic acids. What's important to recognize about these is these bottom three, those are the only ones that end up as monomeric units. Fats, well, they don't end up as a monomeric unit. Are fats a part of a cell? Absolutely. But what makes them different is that fats don't polymerize. So I'm going to say not. They are not forming polymers, or you do not use fats to form a polymer. Compare that to sugars. They're going to polymerize into polysaccharides, which we'll talk about those later. Amino acids polymerize into proteins. Nucleic acids polymerize into large molecules like DNA or RNA. Oh, sorry, RNA. Okay. Now, the unique role of carbon. Carbon is our I would say our central atom, or a central element that we'll talk about quite often in a biochemistry course, whether it's Biochemistry 1 or Biochemistry 2. And one thing that I'd like you to recognize about that is, well, it's quite common to find any one of these different bonds. A carbon to a hydrogen bond. Okay, pretty simple. Got it. Carbon to an oxygen bond. Well, carbon is going to bind to oxygen either as a single bond or a double bond. Next up, carbon and nitrogen. Carbon and nitrogen can also bond as a single or a double bond. And then finally, the last one, which I'm going to go with blue, you can have a carbon-carbon single, double, or triple bond. Okay, so in all of these cases, when looking at these cases, you might end up with like a partial positive charge, but that's pretty much it. And if so, it'd be a very, very temporary charge. Okay, so think about this as these are some of the major bonds major bonds that we will see in this class. Now, the 30 elements essential for life. Well, when we look at the periodic table, this isn't the first time. It's not going to be the last time. But look at the bottom of the periodic table. You've got the lanthanides and actinides. And man, oh man, are they in the periodic table? Yeah. Do we ever talk about the lanthanides and actinides? In Gen Chem 1, Gen Chem 2, you talk about it in terms of maybe the electronic configuration, but that's about it. But they are just not a big deal. At any rate, I'm sure that they're unique in their own right and everything like that. But if you look at the periodic table, we're even going to kind of comb it back further, because for biochemistry, we do not care about a huge number of atoms. Hydrogen, yeah. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, absolutely. Sodium, potassium, and calcium, those are going to be your ions that we talk about quite often. Magnesium sometimes. We will talk about some of these transition metals periodically, as well as selenium and an iodine. But then phosphorus, sulfur, and chlorine are kind of the last ones that we'll talk about on a very regular basis. Now those metals, those transition metals and group 1 and group 2 metals, we will see them in metabolism. We will see them when we talk about like adenosine triphosphate, for example. But more times than not, when it comes to biochemistry, you're just talking about carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and hydrogen, obviously. And so that's kind of where we're going to basically keep everything confined. We will talk about sulfur because it's involved. It's found in some amino acids, but that's kind of it.